most important thing is passion. You
Okay.
have to be passionate about the arts, right?
Mhm.
Because our industry it's a couple things, right? We've got every one of our projects is high pressure in a way, because most of our clients, they're only ever going to do this once. And that doesn't matter whether
Right,
it's an
right.
elementary school or high school or a college or, or or the Palace Theater, right? Most of us who worked on the renovation of that, and the next time it gets
Mhm.
renovated, we may not be here, right? Like
Yeah,
most
yeah,
folks, you get one shot at this.
yeah.
And so you have to be really passionate about the work. It's a lot of travel. It can be long hours, and the attention to detail, right? You got to have an exceptional attention to detail, because everything about designing a theater, it's all the devil's in the details,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the first thing. The second.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Nakoto Building Arts. I'm your host, Nakoto, and today I'd like to welcome another wonderful guest to the podcast, Scott Crossfield. Scott is a principal director for the internationally recognized theater design and planning company, Theater Projects. TP, as they're sometimes called, has collaborated on more than 1,800 venues in over 80 countries since its founding 65 years ago. As the principal director located in New England, Scott has over 25 years of experience consulting on hundreds of arts projects worldwide. His work includes concept design, planning and programming, site assessment, and feasibility studies. A few of his notable projects include the Moss Art Center at Virginia Tech University, also known as the Cube. It's a mix of adaptive reuse and new construction, 147,000 square foot art center that features a versatile 1,260-seat multi-purpose auditorium, art galleries, and TV studio. The Fisher Center for the Performing Arts, a 1,700-seat concert hall at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee, and the Dr. Phillips Center for the Performing Arts in Orlando, Florida, at a construction cost of over $600 million. This amazing performing arts center comprises a 22,370-seat Broadway-style theater, a 1,700-seat multiform theater, and a 304-seat courtyard theater. Scott is a fellow of the American Society of Theater Consultants and is on the board of directors. He is also a regular speaker at industry conferences and guest lectures on theater design at numerous prestigious universities. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the podcast, Scott Crossfield. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing great, Nakoto. Good to see you, and I really appreciate you asking me to be on.
Oh man, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man and traveling the world and doing all these one of these 1,800 projects that you guys have really been burning it up lately, man. How you keep it all together?
It's absolutely phenomenal. We've got the best team in the business. That's how we keep it together. So
Yeah, awesome. Yeah.
right. You hire the best people you can find, and then you do the best you can to retain them and to grow them, to teach them, and to give them the opportunities to really make their careers sing. So I'm surrounded by the best and really appreciative of that.
Awesome. And I was looking at your website and saw there's the Brown University, I guess that just opened. That's a recently opened projects. You have some promotions of different people, like you say, some of those great people in the organization. So that's awesome. I like to see what you guys are doing there. And it's always good to work with you all. I had an opportunity to work with you all as a cost consultant on several projects. So it's good to be able to be a part of that.
Yeah, well, we've always loved working with Venue, and I think you and I have a handful of projects together right now.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
always wonderful to have you on board. You're extremely collaborative, and it's nice to have a good partner on a project.
Yeah. With COVID, everything has been sort of online. So I think the first time I met you face to face in person was at the IVM conference in Pittsburgh just recently. So that was a good experience. Did you enjoy that conference there?
I always get to enjoy it because my
Yeah.
good friend Robert and I do our history of talk. So, which is always fantastic. And we get to talk about theater history and the cities that IBM Venue Connect goes to. So, but yeah, no, it was a wonderful conference. And also I went to college at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh.
Oh,
So
awesome,
yeah,
awesome.
so it was a
Yeah,
little bit
yeah,
of a
yeah.
homecoming for me. So which is
Yeah, great, great. Well, that leads me into the beginning. Before we get into what you do now in your current situation, I like to sort of start from the beginning. It's always interesting for me to hear how people got into this industry. It's a niche industry, and only a small handful of people that either design or consult or cost estimate. It's like you see running to the same crowd everywhere, competing against the same people on different projects. So take us from the beginning. How did you get involved with this?
so
Where are you from?
yeah, so I'm from a small town in Northwest Connecticut called Winsted, Connecticut.
Winston.
And yeah, and my family still lives there. And I started working in the theater just kind of on a lark. So a buddy of mine, when we were 10 years old, had a crush on a girl who was in a production of Peter Pan at the Warner Theater in Torrington. And so, and here, I'll show you a photo of my theater that I grew up in.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me bring that up for you.
You have access.
Yeah, there you go. So this is the Warner Theater. It was a 1,700-seat picture palace built in 1931 as part of the Warner Brothers chain. And it had effectively gone defunct. It had been flooded. There was a flood in the 50s. It was covered in silt. It was saved by a community group. And they basically slowly throughout the years brought it back. And so when I was 10 years old, I went to this theater with a buddy, and my family, we didn't have a lot of art and culture in my family growing up. So for when I walked into this theater, it was completely transformative, right? This view that you see on screen, that changed my life completely because this whole world of the arts opened up for me and I gravitated towards it just phenomenally.
Wow.
Yeah, phenomenally. So I worked at the Warner Theater every single day growing up through graduating high school. And I kind of cut my teeth there. And there was a neighboring organization, the Nutmeg Ballet. And they're a feeder school to the Joffrey and to ABT and others, a really high level ballet school. And it was right down the street. And so I did technical direction and lighting design and audio and everything under the sun and really learned how theater works, working for those two organizations. And also there was Palabolis and Momix in the area. So every once in a while, there'd be a co-production between the Nutmeg and one of them. So spent a lot of time, just a theater rat. We used to work second day in the theater, get home every night from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. and then somehow make it to school, right? Squeeze in your homework, during study hall. So just phenomenal. I worked constantly in the theater because I loved it. Absolutely.
Wow, awesome. And then how did it translate into college? Because there's not many avenues in like you're a theater. Now, what exactly is the title? You consider a theater designer,
a theater consultant. But my particular specialty is design. So I'm the director of design here at Theater Project. So I really focus on programming, planning, and room design. Room design is really my specialty. So, because there's not one person can know everything. So theater consultants come in a lot of forms. But I really focus on design. And part of the reason I focus on design, if I share again here, give me 1 second. I've always loved to draw and I've always loved art. And so I can share with you one of my paintings here as soon as I can get this thing.
Awesome. The artiste.
Yes. Yeah. And so you can see one of the other things I love to do is I love to draw and I love to paint. Wow, and so in school, my high school did not have a theater program. It didn't have a performing arts program, but it had really good art programs. So I took art every year, and my teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, really took an affection to me and really supported me. And so I drew constantly. I learned to paint, and And I wanted to parlay that plus my love of theater into something. So junior year of high school, I applied to a pre-college program at Carnegie Mellon and got accepted. And the only reason I wanted to do that was to get away from Connecticut, where I grew up. I love Connecticut, but I wanted to go out and go see stuff. So I went to Carnegie Mellon, and at the end was a portfolio review. And because I had extensive theater experience and I had extensive art experience, I got accepted, which was phenomenal. So I went to Carnegie Mellon to study theater. So
now tell me that picture, that painting that you just showed, when did you paint that? Is that
that was probably, I think that particular one was about 15 years ago, maybe something like that. 10, 15 years
that's
ago.
awesome. Yeah.
So yeah, I used to paint a lot more before I had children and when they were younger. And then, the last decade or so has been going to swim meets and taking my daughter to ride the horse and
yeah.
But not as much personal time, but
wow. So that's awesome. So you began your journey in Carnegie Mellon. So you got into which program was that?
So it was the School of Drama, right? Which is actually the oldest drama school in America. And I really focused on being a scenic designer and maybe a costume designer. I really enjoyed costume design, but I don't think I was that talented. I was much more talented in scenic design. So that was my focus. Originally, I wanted to be a Broadway set designer. That was the original goal. And then I was graduating on a Saturday, and the day before, my mother's in a coffee shop, just grabbing a coffee, and a buddy of mine, Andy Smith, who owns Boycenemic Designs, which is one of the top AV firms for performing arts in America, happens to be standing behind her in line in a coffee shop, taps her on the shoulder and says, "Oh my God, Angie, how you doing?" What's Scott up to these days? And she says, "Oh my God, actually, he graduates tomorrow. And we're coming home this weekend." And Andy says, "Well, does he have a job?" And my mom said, "No." Andy says, "Well, can he start Monday?" And so Monday morning after I graduate, I walk into Andy's office 9 a.m. And it was only because I could draft, right? I had no consulting skills at all, but he needed a draftsman. I could draft. And he rolls out the drawings for New Jersey Performing Arts Center. And like fireworks went off in my head. And I said, "Wait, you can design performing arts centers?" It never occurred to me that you could design a performing arts center. And I was like, "Oh, I'm not going to design sets on Broadway. I want to design performing arts centers, right? This is what I want to do." I grew up in historic theater. While we were putting on shows, we were also renovating it. My stepfather was a contractor, so I also grew up on construction sites. And, I was a pretty good artist. Like everything kind of came together and it matched all my skill sets and my passions. So I was like, all right.
The career is kind of already set made for you with your experience. And did you give mom a 10% fee or something?
She certainly deserved it. Yeah.
And so New Jersey Performing Arts Center, that's Barton Myers, isn't it? Is that a Barton Myers?
That's Barton Myers. So when I was working with Andy, he was a sub-consultant to Fisher Dax, and I think you had Bob Campbell on a few months ago, if I remember correctly. So one of the premier theater consulting firms. And so my job was to draft AV systems. And I'm not an AV system designer. And then to blueprint them, box them up, and take them to the FedEx back in the days when we had to drop to the FedEx. Right. So lowest man on the totem pole, but I studied to the best of my ability FDA's work because they're beautiful theater designers. And we were working on great projects. And I just kind of, sucked it all in as much as I could because it was what I really wanted to do. And I was lucky enough to be the lowest man on the totem pole to a sub-consultant of a great theater designer.
Wow. Yeah, you work your way. So from there, because I know you at one time did you start your own firms shortly after, or how did you do that?
So from there, I worked for Andy for about a year and a half, and he was a phenomenal mentor. And what's amazing about him and about the group of people who grew up at the Warner Theater, right? There's Andy Smith, one of the best AV designers in the country. Barry Houston is now the executive director of the National Ballet of Canada. A good buddy of mine, Patrick Barrett, who's the director of theater planning at DLR Group. Like there's this amazing group of people that came out of the Warner Theater. Someone should tell the story of it someday. So, but I knew I'm not an AV designer, and I had drawn I don't know, 20, 30, 40 theaters,
Yeah, yeah.
and so I basically applied with a few really well-known theater consultants in New York City, and I was hired by Bob Davis. And
Okay.
Bob Davis is one of the founding members of the American Society of Theater Consultants, and he and I worked together for 10 years. So the first 3 to 4 as his employee, and then he made me partner, and then I was a
Okay.
partner for another about 6 years.
Okay. Okay. All right. And
Yeah.
then, so you lived in New York at that time on those
At,
projects?
at that time, actually, my ex-wife was getting her PhD in Philadelphia. So
Okay.
we actually lived not far from Trenton, New Jersey, just on the other side of
Okay.
the river in Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So I did a 2-hour, 15-minute commute each way into New York for a decade.
Oh my
It
goodness.
was a
Wow.
lot of
Wow.
dedication, but
Yeah.
New York was the place to be. And
I
so,
guess it still is, huh?
yes,
It seems like everything is revolves around New York City when it comes to theater and
yeah.
Broadway. So
Well,
yeah,
yeah, certainly it's one of the hotspots, and it's certainly the premier hotspot in America, in my
yeah,
opinion.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
And so from there, how did you connect with theater projects? Now theater projects that is originally started by Richard Pribble. Right?
So Richard started it, I think it was about 67 years now in
Oh,
London.
since okay.
Yeah. And Richard is, he's a legend and
Right. Yeah.
absolutely prolific in the industry. And
Hmm.
so the way I got to work with Richard is basically I had a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old, and I was commuting 4.5 hours each day to the office and back and traveling so much and whatnot. And
Hmm.
an opportunity came up at Theater Projects where they wanted a designer. And I said, well, boy, I could move to Connecticut, have a backyard. I've got these 2 young kids,
Right.
and all the craziness can stop. Because as
Hmm.
much as I loved working in New York, it'd be a lot better to live near my office, put those hours to better use either with the kids or for my clients. So they made me an
Makes sense.
offer, and it was a partner track offer, and I took it. So
Awesome. Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And since I
Mhm.
grew up in Connecticut, that put me closer to my family. And so it was a really nice mix, and it was the right
Yeah.
choice for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, awesome.
mhm.
Oh, I think I skipped the question about it was Davis Crossfield, and
Yeah.
some of the projects that you did with them were
Yeah. I
what?
worked on, yeah. So we did some pretty amazing projects. I'll share just a couple. So
Mhm.
this is the Globe News Center in Amarillo, Texas.
Oh,
And yeah, just absolutely. So it's a multi-use hall. What you're seeing here, it's called a wood lamella. So this was done with Holzman Moss Patino architects.
yeah. Hmm.
So yeah, and a lot of time working with Malcolm Holzman on it,
Hmm.
and just phenomenal. And that orchestra shell actually is automated on rails, and so it's remote control, and it glides upstage, downstage in a few minutes. So it's an
Hmm.
opportunity to do kind of a really unique, one-of-a-kind project with exceptional technology. So,
Hmm.
and then I got to look
Yeah.
over here to hit my button. And then also with Malcolm, the Hilton Performing Arts Center at George
Mhm.
Mason University in Manassas, Virginia, which I got to tour this with another client a few months ago, and it's stunning. It really is a beautiful
Yeah.
hall. And then this one here, let me zoom in a little bit. It's the Maimondi
Right.
Concert Hall, which is
Constable.
in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay.
So with Bob, we got to do, a lot of off-Broadway theaters, a lot of educational work, but also some really, really beautiful larger
Hmm.
projects. So I get to cut
Yeah.
my teeth on all sizes and scales of project, which was really nice. So,
Yeah. And I guess it's from theater to concert hall, and I guess all those theaters give you a well-roundedness on
you get a
all those types. Yeah.
broad perspective,
Hmm.
right? And which is
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
need in our industry. We work on all types of projects, and they're not all specifically theaters.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So I guess a lot of lessons learned from that company now. So now you're at Theater Project, and you are the principal director.
Yeah. So I'm one of the partners, and I'm our director of design.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So I
How
lead
many
our
partners for how many partners with TP, by the way?
so Theater Projects has 8 partners right now,
Okay.
and then and then we have principals as well. So
Principals. Gotcha.
yeah,
Okay. All right. So your role there, and you're based out of New England,
yeah,
Connecticut area, right?
yeah.
So what is your role? What is the principal director? What does that encompass?
Yeah, so I wear multiple hats.
Okay.
Primarily I work out of Connecticut, sometimes New York. So
Mhm.
I'm a couple things. I am the chairman of the board for Inc., which is the U.S. side corporation.
Okay.
I'm our director of design, so I really guide
Mhm.
building planning, programming on many projects, and specifically room design. So,
Mhm.
when someone wants a concert hall, what's that mean? When someone wants an opera house, what's that mean? When someone
Right.
wants a
Yeah.
mission
Yeah.
barn, what's that mean? So
Yeah.
those are primarily, and then, of course, as any business owner does, you do a lot of sales, a lot of
Mhm.
interviews and other things like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then making sure that I'm kind of the steward of our design philosophy, building on Richard and others and building on our heritage, but adopting, everything new in the industry and evolving trends, to make sure that we stay at the forefront of theater
Right.
design.
Right, right. So looking at your website, there's a lot of interesting projects that you all have done. What are some of your favorite? The ones that I like to say, which ones are you most pleased with? Because I'm sure that maybe I don't know if they've all turned out the way you wanted it to, but what are the ones that you are most pleased with?
Great. So I'll share one that you spoke about already. So this is an image of Steinmetz Hall, but it's the
Okay.
Dr. Phillips Center for the Performing Arts in Orlando. And the reason this one is special to me is for many, many reasons. So this project, Theater Project started this in 1986, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
So I was in middle school, I believe. So, but that's when Richard started having conversations about the Dr. Phillips Center. When I started at Theater Projects in 06, I think this was one of my first trips down, where they were doing the info session. We all had to compete for the project. And it's been a labor of love because phase 2 opened 2 years ago now.
Mhm.
So, it basically my entire tenure at Theater Projects, this project was in the office. But part of the reason it's really special to me, not only is it a phenomenal building, but I got to work with Richard Pilbrow directly. So,
Okay.
I've known of Richard my entire life, and I actually had reached out to him when I was in high school. And,
Oh,
I wanted to go down to the office to meet them when I was a senior in high school. And I couldn't because my mother said, no, I'm not driving that far.
oh, you were serious about
Yeah.
this early. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
no, I was very serious about this
Yeah.
early, right? I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I knew that there was a legend in Connecticut and I wanted to go meet him. So, but
Yeah.
the Dr. Phil is just a phenomenal project. So Steinmetz Hall in particular is what's called a multiform hall. So this hall goes from kind of opera house form to concert hall form through what we call the cassette, which is basically a movable orchestra shell that's scalable with towers. And then it also
Mhm.
goes completely flat floor as well using the Gala
Yeah.
venue system. So, the things that you're able to do in this room, and it's got world-class acoustics. They were designed by Damien Doria. So
Mhm.
it's just phenomenal. And it took the best of everyone here at Theater Projects to make it happen. It's the type of project that very few people can pull off, and I'm so proud that we did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
And
that's
I was gonna say I worked on this project too as far as costing on it. So
yeah,
I'm looking at the pictures and I'm saying, oh wow, okay, that's how it turned out. Yeah.
yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah,
I talked to Stephen Tong the other day, actually, who's one of the vice presidents over there, and
yeah,
so we're planning to do a little tour of it to
right.
get an idea of how it turns out.
Got it. Well, you let me know and I'll meet you there anytime. Happily.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
I will.
Great. So another project I'm really proud of is the new Fisher Center for the Performing Arts in Nashville.
Mhm.
So yeah, it is
Oh,
absolutely
it's
stunning. So
nice.
this is a 1,700 seat multi-use hall, not a multi-form, but a multi-use.
Okay.
But it has exceptional acoustics. In this case, it was designed by Russ Todd at Acoustics. So they're the firm that just did the Geffen Hall renovation at Lincoln Center.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so you're seeing it with the shell in, but it's got a full stage house, scalable orchestra shell for different size ensembles, fully acoustically tunable, and it's stunning. And you rarely get to do a room of this scale in a neoclassical style. So like Steinmetz was a much more modern style than with Barton Myers. This is a much
Hmm.
more neoclassical style
Yeah.
from Earl Swenson Associates. And yeah, Just a stunning project. And this one was built during COVID, design and construction in total 4 years, tip to stern. Right. And nothing stopped during COVID. The team was phenomenal that got this built. Yeah, but it's a gorgeous room. And what I love about it is that's all an acoustically transparent ceiling. So we're capturing all the acoustic volume up ahead or up overhead. And we've got variable acoustics up there to dampen it. But you don't see all of that. So it looks like a gorgeous traditional room with a beautiful dome and gorgeous lighting. But it performs like the most modern room. So best of both worlds.
Yeah, I talked to Russ Todd. I had him on the podcast earlier, and he shared this project with me. It's a beautiful project. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So no, that's and anytime you get to spend several years in Nashville, right? Amazing food and amazing
exactly.
a
growing city too. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And then this is the other one that you mentioned earlier. This is just a detail of the Lindaman Center for the Performing Arts at Brown University. So this we did with Rex. We also did the Wiley Theater with Rex, and they just opened the new Performing Arts Center at the World Trade Center site. So the Perlman. So this is the only theater on the planet of its kind, right? It's kind of a radical theater machine where many of the galleries, the side galleries that you see are actually gantries that move. And so that you can take it from the largest setting for full orchestra and chorus. And, we saw Beethoven's Ninth there last Friday, and it sounds stunning, right? Threshold Acoustics did just a phenomenal job on the acoustics on this one. But, you can do that. You can take all of these gantries and basically move them into our center line to create a recital configuration, then widen, the back half but narrow the front to make more of an end stage. Then the control room end also moves as a gantry. So to create immersive spaces, or the idea of this is that the theater is part of the creative tool. And in terms of student learning, it's about the journey, not the destination. And so we really wanted to inspire artists and creatives when they came into the room to really rethink the way that they were going to create their art and provide them tools to do it. So it's just a phenomenal, phenomenal space. So I'm so excited to see what they do in the future.
Yeah, I noticed on a lot of some of Rex's, Joshua Prince Rams's projects is always have that ability to shift shape, shift shape many different forms to create different spaces. Man, that has to be very challenging on your side as a theater designer.
Yeah. So, this project was built using a process called IPD, Integrated Project Delivery, which you may know about, right? And so, all the teams there and you're all in it together, right? You shared success or shared failure as it goes. And we spent 4 months talking about the aspirations of the project, the program, the budget, what it wanted to be, what it wanted to do before we ever put pen to paper. And I think that portion of it was absolutely brilliant. Because it gave all of us 4 months of time to really think about what the building should be and what this space should be. And when it was time to put pen to paper, I woke up one morning and I had this idea. If we're going to create a space that's really about empowering students, right, and it's a tool that moves and morphs for them, I had this idea when you're a designer and you get a new opportunity, right, your heart starts to pound a little bit and you get excited. Right. And there's kind of this heartbeat. And so I had this idea that the room should be a heartbeat that can swell and shrink with the artist's needs. And and so that was kind of the first thought that came to my mind. So I went in early one morning because we had a 9 o'clock meeting. So I went in at 8 and I started drawing on a whiteboard. Right. That'll be one of the biggest regrets of my career. Not that I didn't draw on trace or something that I can take with me and have in the archive. But we had a room full of people, a big whiteboard. So I drew and I did some sketches on the whiteboard. And Carl Gilgoth from Threshold, who was just brilliant, came in and said, "Oh my God." And then he started drawing on the whiteboard, right? And other people, right? And the next thing you know, this great idea came out of a lot of people really, spending the time to think about what it means to create a space like this and then all collaborating together. So it is truly one of the most collaborative designs you could ever hope for.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's actually one of my questions about how you manage those relationships. But before I ask you that, because you're showing some of the projects and some of them were like the Steinmetz had 1,700 or so seats. Another one over 2,000 seats. And I was watching a documentary a speech by Richard Pearl, and he was doing a presentation. I can't remember which conference it was, but he was talking about some of the theaters being built today were too large.
Mhm.
And his idea was that it was too many seats in some of them, and the intimacy was lacking between the audience and the performer. Do you have a specific view on that whole how many seats are too big, or how many,
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. And it really depends on the type of theater you're building.
Okay.
So for instance, if we start small and we think about like an educational space, a space for, say, high school students, right? They have not yet developed their voice and their ability to reach out and grab the heartstrings of an audience and really, command an audience's attention. They're learning it. They're growing their craft. So in like an educational space, you intentionally want to keep it much smaller.
Okay.
Right. At a scale that the students can really be effective, because we don't want to put them in a big barn and have them not be able to communicate and get discouraged. Right. And you're working against their training. So the theater is part of the tool that makes the student succeed. And I wrote an article about this. So in a book a few years ago called Rooms for the Learned Musician. So this is Shane Canner from Threshold, one of the writers of it. And he asked me to write an article. And I wrote an article about designing for students and designing for that student experience and how you create a space that wraps and envelops. And one of the things that we care most about is called the actor-audience relationship, or the artist-audience relationship, and also the audience-audience relationship. So when we're creating a space, right, it's a communal space. We're all in this together. It's why you go to the live theater versus, sitting at home in front of the TV or the screen. And so you and I want to connect. I want to watch, if you're the artist, I want to watch you connect with another audience member. Right. And then a great energy goes around the room, right? And it's palpable and you can feel it. And so you want that type of space, and you can scale it, absolutely. So, but it really depends on the genre. So, if it's going to be a drama, like some of the best kind of plays or dramatic works on Broadway are usually in the smaller houses, where you can see the whites of someone's eyes and you can see their mouth and their facial expressions, right? And you can really connect on a visceral level. Where, something else, we're all looking at the success of the Sphere in Vegas, right? 2,600 seats. It's phenomenally successful for what it is, a big immersive space with U2 amplified, absolutely brilliant for that. You, of course, as an extreme example, you couldn't put those high school students in that space.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Right, as an extreme. So it's an interplay on what type of art is going to be in the room, and then, if it's a symphony hall, right, there are dimensions that, when we work with acousticians, that are critical dimensions for them for initial reflections and lateral reflections to get, clarity and warmth and envelopment. And so there's certain volumes, and that's been some of the mistakes, say, for concert halls throughout the year, is they basically took that form and then just grew it in terms of seat count. And at some point, you don't have the reflections where you need to be because the room's too big. So seat count is all relative to the art form that's going to be housed inside the room and how you're going to use it. So, but for the most part, Richard's absolutely right. People always want more because they want, they need the ticket sales, they need the revenue, right? There's bills to pay, which is completely reasonable. And so it's always that interplay between, operations and finances versus artistic integrity. So,
that's kind of what I was going to get at too. Like, okay, from your standpoint as a designer, you're saying, okay, for the best community and the energy, you probably need a certain amount of seats, but then you have the financial side of it, and you have a developer involved. Sometimes it's like, oh no, it needs to be this amount of seats because of the revenue to keep it functional. So I guess that's a tug of war or whatnot too.
No, absolutely. It's one of the reasons we're kind of blessed here at Theater Projects, because we have a strategies and operations team that deal with that every day. And so they do business planning and operating pro formas, and we also do venue programming. So we'll really help you fill those seats, but also help determine what's the right amount of seats, right quantity, right, and understanding the business model as well as what it takes to get the buildings built. So best of both worlds, all here internally, which is great because that information is only a phone call away.
Okay. Now, you talked one time about you mentioned your relationship between the architect and the different consultants, acoustician, and different players involved with it. I assume most of your clients, though, are performing arts organizations that you work for, and like you just mentioned, you give them advice. You have your performers and so forth. Do you ever get into a situation where you deal with a client that isn't listening to you, that they don't, they're ignoring your advice, and you're like, how do you deal with that? I
Yeah.
guess that's it. Yeah.
So first off, thankfully, it's very rare.
Okay.
Right? They hired us for a reason. So if they hired
Yeah.
us, it's because they know they need the help,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
we've got a great team. So for the most
Yeah.
part, they listen,
Okay.
right? But when you're in a difficult situation like that, right, we're always going to go back to the facts and the research, go back to
Mhm.
the data, right? It's just number one, you just stick with the data and be very honest, open, and transparent about it, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's the financials, what it takes to operate a space, we just had an incident where a client called us and they wanted to bring Broadway through town. And we
Okay.
said, well, except that you're too close to, their proximity to another city meant that these are the tours they were going to get, and it's going to be union, it's going to have a labor cost, right? And if
Mhm.
you look at the current seat count, if you look at what we think we can do to increase seat count, you still don't get to the point where you can
Mhm.
actually viably bring Broadway through. So you've got to pivot and think about other programming that you might bring through,
Right.
right? But that was all data driven. It was all, understanding the industry,
Mhm.
understanding how they were going to move that product, right? If they could move that product. And so, it just comes back to the experience of our team and the type
Mhm.
of work that we do.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, now we're part of the interview where I ask the expert, and you
All
are the
right.
expert here. So I just wanted to. There's one question here. Explain the difference between a multi-purpose theater and a multi-form theater.
Okay. So, and we've touched on this a little bit. So, a multi-purpose theater is
Mhm.
basically a fixed format, if you will. And the most traditional is, your proscenium theater. So, like you
Mhm.
just saw, the Fisher Center is a perfect example of that, where it does many things. It does, symphonic work, the choral work, unamplified. Then you can bring in, touring Broadway shows. You can bring in dance, or like a musical theater and dance. And then, the Nashville Opera perform there. So it does all of those types of performance, but effectively in one format with some adjustability, but the format is fixed.
Okay.
Where a multiform is where the architecture actually moves. And there's a couple ways to do that, right? We've got projects where it's moving towers.
Mhm.
You just saw Brown University, it's hanging gantries where the
Mhm.
architecture moves and grows.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, the Dr. Phillips Center in Orlando, it's the cassette, which is, basically a small building, if you will, that moves. That's the
Mhm.
orchestra shell and the floor goes flat. So yeah, it's the difference between fixed format and a movable format in the architecture.
Okay. Okay. Now with the you just mentioned the gantry, the moving. Who was the structural engineer on that? Because I'm sure there had to be some thought going into that. Yeah,
there
you
were
remember?
there were a lot of folks who went into that. So we had Michael Nishbal on our side was doing the stage engineering, and then we had
Okay.
Texas Scenic. We were very lucky to have Texas Scenic to
Okay.
actually help get that built. So yeah, there
Wow.
was a lot of folks worked on
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought of a question too. I asked you about the theater that you're most proud of. You ever had any challenges on? Has there ever been any projects where it's like, man, I don't know if we can design this, or just a situation where it took a lot of time and a lot of knocking heads to figure out what's the best solution for this facility?
Yeah. That happens frequently. Usually it's
Okay.
about budget, as you know, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
trying to it's trying to
It's more
match,
budget driven. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
trying to match the aspiration and desire with the budget. So that's
Okay.
always a tough one, right? And we're constantly asked, all right, how do we take this project and pare it down to a certain budget? How do we reduce program, reduce scope, still make
Mhm.
it functional, right? So that's a toughie that we deal with all the time. The other
Mhm.
one is, say, on some of these multiform theaters, like Steinmetz Hall, like the Lindaman Center,
Mhm.
Brown, all of those configurations have to work, and they have to be viable in terms of the manpower and the time and the cost to do that flexibility. Because, when you design a really flexible room that's really expensive to flex, takes a long time, people just don't do it, right? And we've seen that in so many theaters.
Right.
So it's really important to understand as we're doing those initial designs, we're thinking about the configurations and the formats of the space. And then we're also in parallel looking at the manpower and the time and the cost to do it. So that before we get too far down that road, we're saying, okay, now we understand what it will take. Is this something that's palatable to everybody, right? Because, ultimately the owner's going to have to operate it.
Right.
And so it's got to be something that they can afford to or and are willing to do that type of flexibility. So,
I was at a theater, I won't say where, and I was speaking to a VP of operations. He actually manages several theaters, and he gave me a tour. I think it was last year of a couple of theaters. And he said, the next time you're in one of the design meetings, can you please tell them to not put the air condition underneath the seats, the displacement, displacement system. So I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that whole.
I wish, Nikoto, I wish he told you why. So
he said the people get too cold, but I don't think it's right underneath the seats though, is it?
Yeah, so generally, actually, you provide warmer air in a displacement system. So, right, because overhead supply, which is the traditional, normally you have to cool it down, and then you're going to do high volume, low velocity to keep it quiet, right? And it's going to be diffusely, hopefully, brought down to the audience. Where displacement, you actually sometimes cool it down, remove humidity, and then you might have to warm it back up to a reasonable temperature to deliver it to folks. But that can often be a lot quieter, and generally it's a lot more comfortable. We do it all the time, especially in acoustic music rooms, whether it's a concert hall or opera house or that type of room, because it provides better acoustic quality and it's quieter. But it does come at a cost. Absolutely. You got to build that plenum that you're pushing that air through. So
yeah, he was speaking more of the comfort level. I never heard that before, but
yeah, all right.
I said, okay, I'll bring it up and see what they say.
All right, yeah, have him give me a call. So,
okay, okay, I'll tell you who it is later too, by the way.
Right.
But let's last couple questions here. In your opinion, what is the future of performing arts in theater, amphitheater, building? Any thoughts of? It seems like it seems like there are cycles too with this. I've only been in it since really the early 2000s, 2007, when I got into the performing arts world. I came from a construction side of it, but it was all university or residential, other stuff. So being in this theater world, and at one point there weren't many projects coming out, especially after 2008, when that whole thing slowed down. But it's like cycles. Right now, it seems like a lot of projects are coming online and people are planning and thinking about it. What are your thoughts about this whole the future of performing arts?
Yeah. Excellent question. And I think the landscape certainly has changed post-pandemic. So we're seeing a couple trends, and you're 100% right. It is cyclical, right? And and there are either building booms or recessions, and there are also certain kind of different disciplines in the performing arts seem to build more or less over time. So right now, post-pandemic, we're doing a lot of amphitheaters, right? And I think this is a direct response to COVID, where people were, they were inside for a year or two, and now they want to get out. But when they get out, they want to really be out, right?
Right,
so,
exactly.
Yeah. So a lot of amphitheaters, and a good chunk of those are actually in parks or parts of communities. And so I think people have really taken to heart the meaning of friends, family, and community. And they really want to develop spaces for community activity, which is a lot of fun. So that's certainly a trend right now, a lot of amphitheaters. We're seeing a lot of educational projects. So, the population continues to grow for the most part. Right. And, universities and schools are really putting a lot of emphasis in the arts or combining them. That's the other big trend. When does a performing arts center become an arts and innovation center or an arts and technology center? And we're seeing a lot more of that, interdisciplinary work between, maybe it's computer science and arts, engineering. So that is certainly a big trend right now.
Yeah.
We're seeing another trend, I think, is the more traditional performing arts, symphonies, operas, dance companies, resident theater companies are really taking a hard look at their business models, right? And viability, because, the more traditional arts are certainly, they're struggling more to rebuild audiences post-COVID, right? And, it's coming back slowly. So I think they're really looking at their business models and making sure that there's sustainability and viability moving forward. What we're not seeing right now are as many of the very large performing arts centers that we saw over the past, say, 30 years. And for many reasons, there still are some out there. But, a lot of the cities have built them. And so, we will have a cycle coming up soon where we're going to be renovating the buildings. At some point,
Yes.
I've already renovated a couple of buildings that I was part of the original design team for.
Wow.
Mostly systems, not the building itself, but
Okay.
audio systems, lighting systems. They're the first to go in terms of product life cycle. But yeah, so we're going to see a lot of renovations, and then thankfully we continue to preserve our heritage and restore historic theaters. So, right, and we've got the Palace Theater, it's a Broadway theater on 47th. It's going to be opening next year. It's going to be finishing up construction this fall. So, it's nice to see all of these historic projects be preserved for future generations.
Awesome. So that leads me to my next question. What's next for you on the horizon?
Yeah, here, and I'll share a few more images here. Yeah, so I'm not allowed to share photos of the Palace Theater. I was there on Wednesday for a walkthrough, and it is absolutely stunning. It is stunning, but here's a photo of it before we started the renovation. Right. And so, this is the Broadway theater that was, it's basically Broadway 47th where the TKTS booth is. And this is the one that was lifted up 30 feet in the air. So if you've read about that project, so it's absolutely stunning. And so for 7 years, most of us in the office to some degree have been working with the Nederlander organization and L&L Holdings, who are the developer, on the basically renovation and restoration of this space. So I'm really excited. At the moment, it looks like it's going to finish construction in December, hopefully, and then load in a show early next year. So that's one of the things I'm really excited to go see after all the years of work, to go see this one in action.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So, yeah. And then as part of that project, so that's the TSX project. And so this is in you might have seen in the Times or other places, Post Malone did a concert out on Times Square.
So
as part of the project, the developer, we've been working with him for years on TSX, which is, it's a very large development, but focusing on the Times Square stage, the elevated stage, with the large doors that actually close it. So, the building is basically seamless, LED, right, matching the building across 47th. And then you can open it up and do performances. So I'm looking forward maybe to my first time going to Times Square on New Year's Eve, but I might brave the cold this year to get in action. So
and more lights in Times Square, huh? More.
I know. It's phenomenal. And then on a personal note, a couple things. I just got engaged.
Oh,
so
awesome, man. Congratulations.
Thank you. Very excited about that. Very excited. And then as I was talking to you earlier, tomorrow I'm being honored with kind of a lifetime achievement award from my high school. And so I'm going to go up and accept that tomorrow. Yeah, that was really a surprise. Right. I didn't know they remembered me, so when they reached out and said, "Oh my God, you've had a pretty amazing career. We'd like to recognize it." That was sweet. Man. Yeah. And
now,
then
are they building you a statue, or are you
no? I think a plaque, but I'll take it. Yeah. So, but yeah, that'll be fun. My family's in the area, so we'll all go out and have a nice meal, and they're going to come, so that'll be a lot of fun. And then I've been attending. So IAVM does venue management school.
Right.
And so I did year one of venue management school this year. I'm going to go back for year two in the spring. So I'm really excited about that because, it's basically, I've been doing this for a long time, and I felt like I probably knew most of it, but I really wanted to round out my education and always stay current. So so I'm doing venue management school, and then you just saw this that's up on screen. So the history of. So this summer, I'm going to be doing the history of with my friend Robert Long at Venue
Yeah.
Connect, right?
Yeah, I thought that was Robert. It was Robert
Yeah.
Long there.
Yeah, that's him. So
Yeah.
so Robert and I are going to continue our tradition. I think this will be year 13.
Okay.
Year 12, year 13 of the history of, and it's a
Yeah.
lot of fun. So looking forward to that as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I appreciate that. Yeah. My last question, I won't ask you because there's no real direct path to get into what you do.
Yeah.
Like I've talked to many people on that, and you just alluded to it. But what are the types of qualities or attributes of a person that will make a good theater consultant designer? What would they need?
So I think the most important thing is passion. You
Okay.
have to be passionate about the arts, right?
Mhm.
Because our industry is it's a couple things, right? We've got every one of our projects is high pressure in a way because most of our clients, they're only ever going to do this once. And that doesn't matter whether it's an elementary school or high school or a college or, or or the Palace Theater, right? Most of us who worked on the renovation of that, and the next time it gets renovated, we may not be here, right? Like most folks, you get one shot at this.
Yeah.
And so you have to be really passionate about the work. It's a lot of travel. It can be long hours and the attention to detail, right? You got to have an exceptional attention to detail because everything about designing a theater, it's all the devil's in the details, right? And so that's the first thing. The second thing, we look for someone who has a theater background, and our folks come from operations, they come from management, they come from production, they come from design, you name it. But having been there, having been in your client's shoes, right? Having done the late night loadouts, and the early morning load-ins and the long tech runs and all the frustrations that go into putting on a show, you have to have been there. So that's critically important, right? And then I think the final thing is you have to have a team spirit, right? No one person designs a theater. No one person has ever designed a theater, right? It's always a team of collaborators. Some of our projects, it's hundreds of people. And on some of the bigger ones, like a Dr. Phillips, thousands of people collaborated on the building. And you are one of those thousands. And so even though we have a pretty key role in the project, right? So do a lot of other people. And so it's that collaborative team effort. And if you're a team player, then it'll work fine, like a sports team.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
When there's a team.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Well, that was a great conversation, Scott. I really appreciate it. Final question is, how can our viewers get in contact with you? What's the best way they want to reach out to you?
So the fastest way is just to give me a call.
Okay. And I can put your information down below your email.
Or they can email me at scrossfield@theaterprojects.com.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, Scott. Thank you for your time, and we'll be seeing you soon.
Perfect. All right, man. Thanks.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.